Welcome everyone to Masechet Kiddushin. Today we're going to be learning Kiddushin Daf Bet. Welcome if there's new learners. If you don't yet know, you don't yet have our bookmarks. So number one, there's a PDF of the bookmarks for Kiddushin on today's Daf post on our site. So please look there and you can get the bookmarks for Kiddushin if you don't yet have them. If you would like to order for Seder Nezikin, you can go on our website. On the menu tab, you can find bookmarks and you can order the bookmarks. The registration is till August 16th. So please get your order in. That's almost around the corner. Please get your order in as soon as possible. What else? Okay. If you're not familiar yet with our site, there's a page to subscribe. You can subscribe to get WhatsApps. You can subscribe to a podcast and receive the podcast every day. You can find it in audio. You can find it on YouTube. Also, you can join Hadran's channel and be a part of Hadran. You'll get notifications of new shiurim that go up. We have weekly shiurim. We have daily daf shiurim. So you can find all the content either on the website, also on a YouTube channel. There's introductions to Masechet Kiddushin, a written introduction by Gita Neufeld, and a video or audio introduction by Ayala Lipson. Recommended to read the introductions. I'm not going to spend too much time on introductions, maybe just a little bit, but those introductions really give you a perspective on what's up and coming in the Masechet, giving an order to things, etc. Okay, we'll start with our dedications and then we'll move to a little bit of intro, as I said, very short, and then we'll move into the daf. Masechet Kiddushin is sponsored by Julie and Martin Mendelson in honor of our two children who were married this past year and for arranging with our son the successful shidduch of another young couple. May all of our fellow learners and all of Am Yisrael have the zchut to see all of their children under the chuppah. Everyone listening takes the time during these 82 dafim to take action to help just one friend to find his or her shidduch. What an amazing accomplishment we can have together. Looking forward to learning this Masechet together and hearing good news. Okay, we're going to get started with the first basic question, which we asked when we learned Masechet Gitin as well, and some of the other Masechtot in the Seder. We're finishing Seder Nashim Be'ezrat Hashem. That's why we have bookmarks now for Seder Nezikin, which is our next Seder coming up. Just as a promotion, we're having the Siyum of Seder Nashim and Masechet Kiddushin in Poland at the Yeshiva Chochmei Lublin, which is the center, right, was the shul of Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who started Daf Yomi. It will be in the 100th year of Daf Yomi learning, a very exciting trip. The trip is now full, but there is a waiting list. So if you want, you can write to us if you're interested in registering at info@hadran.org.il. Okay, enough publicity stuff for today. Now we're going to go back to why Masechet Gitin comes before Kiddushin. Kiddushin is the betrothal, which really is about betrothing a woman to lead. It's the first stage of marriage. We'll talk about that soon. And Gitin is about divorce. You would think first you talk about marriage, then about divorce. Divorce usually comes after, or always comes after marriage. There's no such thing as divorce before marriage. So a number of answers are given. First answer, some people say, oh, it's lagdin refuah l'makah. Make sure before you get into marriage, you know how to resolve it, right? That's kind of the joke, right? The cure comes before the remedy, before the blow, but that's really more like a joke. However, we did discuss this concept of previously that it might be good going into Kiddushin, knowing that there's a way out, right? It's always our biggest fear, when you get married, what if I made a mistake, right? That there is a way out. Judaism believes that there is a way out. That was the whole topic of yesterday's daf, the last daf of Gitin, which was the perfect lead-in to today's daf. The Rambam has a different approach. The Rambam in Perush HaMishnah, where he discusses the order, he says that the order of the psukim goes from divorce to marriage. Now, this is a bit strange because we've learned already in Gitin, and this is the key pasuk for today and for the upcoming dapim, starts off the pasukim about marriage and divorce are really all mentioned in the context of remarrying a divorcee. The pasukim all lead up to it as if describing if this were to happen and that were to happen and that were to happen and that would happen, are you allowed to remarry the wife you divorced? So it starts off in chapter 24 of Sefer Devarim, and it says, Ki kach ish isha u'ba'ala, if a man takes a woman and has relations with her. We will be learning a lot about this pasuk in the next few days. And what if he decides he doesn't like her? That was the topic of yesterday's daf. Because he sees some inappropriate behavior. And he writes her a get and a book of separation, and he gives it into her hands and sends her out of the house. Then it says, and then if she leaves his house and then goes and haita, which is lashon havaya, we're going to see a lot, it means kiddushin, she becomes betrothed to somebody else, and he decides to divorce her, and he does the same thing the first husband did, which is divorce her, then or if he dies, the one who married her, the first husband is not allowed to remarry. That was the whole subject of that topic, of those sentences. Even though all the laws of marriage and divorce are learned from here as well, which are much more vast than the laws of returning to your divorce, right? Remarrying your divorcee wife. But the main thing I wanted you to note here is that after she gets divorced from the next husband, she immediately, in that pasuk, marries the next husband. So in that pasuk, the order is divorce and then marriage. And you might say, that seems a little weird though, because it all started off with marriage and then went to divorce and then went to remarriage. But we are going to see a lot of times in this, certainly in the first few dapim, about making this hakesh, this parallel between divorce and marriage from that exact pasuk because of the juxtaposition of divorce, marriage. We learn a lot of things. So it could be the Rambam says I'm saying it could be the Rambam's right. The Rambam says the reason is because in that pasuk where we're mekish havaya l'yitziah and yitziah l'havaya, we make this juxtaposition. Divorce appears first before marriage. So in the pasuk where they both appear together, it's divorce and then marriage. But Rav Reuven Magarliot, who's a much more modern commentary, says that all the Mishnayot are ordered by number of chapters. And the reason why Gittin comes before Kiddushin is because Gittin has, I don't remember, I think it's 9 chapters, sorry. And Kiddushin has only 4 chapters. So that's why Kiddushin comes after, because it has less chapters. And he shows how it's not just, right, he doesn't say it specifically here. He says it by all the Masechtot that you see in all the Sidarim, that the order gets less and less, in other words, smaller, less number of prakim in each one. So you can do a check and see if that's actually all accurate, but we'll leave it at that right now. Starting with our chapter. Now, our chapter starts off with a series of Mishnayot, all about kinyanim. And in fact, people claim, and you can listen to Ayelet's introduction, it talks about this more, that there's really 2 sections in the first chapter, which is kinyanim and mitzvot. There's a debate about which one came first. Kinyanim, mitzvot, what the connection between them. She has a nice commentary about why those 2 would be one right after the other. But what I want you to get the idea here is that Mishnayot were recited orally, and they would join together Mishnayot with similar wording, not even always similar topics. Here, they're kind of similar topics, but you'll see in a minute, they're very different from each other. We're going to learn about a woman getting acquired by a man. We'll talk about that whole thing about a woman being acquired and what does that mean. And then we're going to move to a slave who becomes acquired by his master, and then to an animal that gets acquired. And we're going to learn different laws of what we call kinyanim, how to do acquisitions. Now, the first chapter is all about kinyan. The second chapter starts and uses the word mikadesh, ha'ish mikadesh. And we're going to learn he could do it by himself. He could do it with a shaliach. She could do it also by herself with a shaliach. And there it uses the term kiddushin, another topic that Ayel discussed in her introduction, and another topic that is going to come up on our daf, about why the language of kinyan was chosen here and the language of kiddushin in the second chapter. Okay, when it comes to the verb. Now, the first, this is always a complicated mission to start with. I always say, don't start in high school teaching girls this chapter because it immediately raises a horrible slew of questions. What do you mean? A woman is acquired by a man. Okay, that's the first words of this Masechet. Haisha niknet b'shalosh drachim. A woman is acquired by a man. We mean through marriage in 3 ways. And what do you mean? A woman's acquired? What? She's a piece of property, right? Women are not objects. Women are subjects. We don't like to objectify women. And how is it that she's compared to the slave and to the animal? Okay, this is something that, by the way, we see a lot that women and slaves end up in similar categories. For example, time-bound mitzvah, right? Often they're in similar categories, but not for the same reasons. And in fact, we're going to see throughout the next number of dapim that the Gemara is going to, in my mind, try to prove to us that this kinyan is not the same kind of kinyan. She doesn't become the property of the husband. He doesn't have rights to her body like he does actually with a slave. As difficult as it is for the slave, I want to focus right now on the woman. and what they're talking about in terms of the woman. Now, the acquiring, there's two things that have to happen in Kiddushin. We're going to see this also throughout, which is there has to be a formal contractual arrangement between the two. That is done at the stage of Kiddushin. And then there's the chuppah, which does the nisuim. We do it all nowadays all together under the chuppah. We separate it by reading the ketubah. That's why we read the ketubah, to make a separation between the first part, which was Kiddushin, and the second part, which is Kiddushin, and the second part, which we call nisuim, the marriage. That's the Sheva Brachot and the chuppah. Now, in those days, they used to do it separate a year before generally, and that we learned already in Masechet Ketubot and in a bunch of other places. That's what we're referring to now, the Kiddushin stage, which basically is a contractual relationship, which means that she's no longer a free agent to marry anyone she wants, but she's designated to this person. They're not yet allowed to be together. They don't live together yet. Okay, although we will see that theoretically he could do the Kiddushin by having sexual intercourse with her, but generally they were separate. We learned that in Judea they actually did sometimes do, but that's a whole separate thing. Generally they didn't, and she would live in her father's house, and the husband doesn't have full rights. We'll get to all that also at that stage, but we'll get to that in the next few dapim as well. And only in the nisuin, which is really the interpersonal relationship, the ishut, the melding of the two people, right? The relationship between them, the focusing on the interpersonal rather than the more contractual. So we're starting with the more contractual, which is the Kiddushin. So Yishani Knei b'shalosh drachim. She is acquired in three ways. V'konet atzma b'shtei drachim. And she can acquire herself back, meaning get out of the marriage. Again, this idea that we get in, but we can also get out in two ways. That's your intro sentence. Now we're going to go into detail. What are the three ways? What are the two ways? This is a classic form of Mishnah where they like to use numbers to number things. Niknei bekesef b'shtar u'b'bi'ah. Okay, these are three ways. The Gemara is going to spend a lot of time showing where do we get this all from. That's going to be coming up. She's acquired with money. Okay, that's what we do now, because it's not just money. It's things that are valued the same, right, as money. So we use a ring, which has monetary value. Bishtar with a document, the same way there's get with a document, it has to be written. You can also do Kiddushin with a document, or bibi'ah, or you can do bi'ah, which, as I said before, you can do intercourse with the intent. You know, all these things have to be done. If he just gives her money, it doesn't mean they're betrothed. He has to say, harat mekudeshet, the way we do under the chuppah. So same thing. He says, right, how, behold, you are betrothed to me through this intercourse. Bekesef, how much money? Okay, he says it has to be a dinar or something worth a dinar. It doesn't have to be with a dinar. A dinar, generally, we assume there was gold dinar and there was a silver dinar. The gold was worth 25 times the silver, but we seem to assume we mean the silver here. And then we have a pruta. A pruta is a copper coin, which is worth 1/192 of a dinar. So we're talking huge difference between the two opinions. Usually opinions aren't so far apart. In this case, they're very far apart. Kamahi pruta, they don't ask how much a dinar, because obviously everybody knew, otherwise they wouldn't be asking, but they ask specifically about the pruta. What is a pruta? This doesn't help us very much, but it helped them understand 1/8 of an isar ha'italki. There was a specific coin, 1/8 of that value. And like I said, that's going to be 1/192 of a dinar. She acquires herself back either by getting a divorce document, or if the husband dies, then she's no longer married, obviously. Now we're moving on. That's a regular woman. What if she's a yivama? Yivama, we know from yivamot. Okay, if you don't know, I'll explain. A woman, her husband dies without children. She's supposed to marry his brother. And how does she become married to him? Not through money or a shtar, only through bi'ah. That's because the pasuk says, Yivama yavo aleha. Okay, he will yavo. Yavo is a connotation for sexual relations. Vikonat atzma, how does she get out of it? How did her obligation of yibum? Either b'chalitza. Okay, if he gives her a get instead of doing yibum, that doesn't do anything. It actually has effects on things that we saw, but it doesn't free her up. She's not free to marry anyone else yet. How does she chalitza? That's a chalitza ceremony where she takes off his shoes, she spits in front of him, and a whole ceremony where she says, how embarrassing that, you didn't continue your brother's name. The other way is, right, also in two ways. So she gets acquired only in one way, but she gets out of it in two ways. And if the Yabam dies and there's no other brothers, then she can marry anyone she wants. So that was our Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to start off. Now this sugya is a classic, what we call a Svorai sugya, which means it's not the Amoraim speaking here. This is a later time period, which is after the years 200 to 500 was this, approximately, it's the time of the Amoraim. After that, Ravina and Rav Ashi kind of finish up editing the Gemara. And then we have a whole genre of content, which is different in nature because the Gemara is already kind of put together. Then they start asking all sorts of other questions. And you'll see that this is a bit of an atypical sugya. They're going to deal a lot with literary things here. And this whole beginning of Kiddushin is known to be a Sephora sugya or a stam. Okay, the stam Gemara also. It's people without a name. Generally, you don't have Rabbi this said that, Rabbi that said that. You have more general questions. They're kind of going on right, either literary, right, things that are a little bit less halachic in nature. Okay, with that, we'll get started. There's a lot more to be said about that, but we'll stop here. So now the Gemara says, Ha'isha niknet, mashnahacha detani ha'isha niknet, u'mashnahatam detani ha'ish mekadesh. So now they go back to what I mentioned earlier. Why does our Mishnah start off with Ha'isha niknet? And there it says ha'ish mekadesh. So now they say, right, one uses the language of kinyan and the other uses the language of kiddushin, which they say, mishum dekabai limitne kesef. The kesef. Okay, so they say, well, they wanted to mention money. So because they were mentioning money, they talked in the languages of kinyan, of acquiring, which they say, the kesef minala. Well, how do we know that you can acquire with money? Because it says in the pasuk, Amar kicha kicha miste Ephron, a classic Zera Shava. The same word appears in two places. We're going to learn from one to the other. We're going to learn from the pasukim about Kiddushin. We're going to learn them from a different place where kicha was mentioned. Where is that? Ephron Hachiti. You might remember him. When Abraham purchases Marana Machpelah, he purchased it when Sarah dies from Ephron Hachiti. So there's a purchase going on there and acquiring, and you're going to see the wording is going to be the word, the shoresh lakach, just like by us, ki kach ishisha. Ktiv hacha ki kach ishisha, that's what it says by us. Uktiv hatam natati hakesef hasadeh kach mimeni. I gave the money, and the sadeh, you should take kach mimeni, natati hakesef hasadeh kach mimeni. Right, the context, I forgot already. This pasuk, I looked it up because there's something confusing about it. Give me 1 minute to just look it up again. This is when, in the whole discussion between Abraham and Ephron, he says, I remember he says this to Ephron and to the people. I just want to look it up for one quick second. Breshit Kaf Gimel, pasuk Yud Gimel. So he says, he says to Ephron with the Amei Aretz, the people there listening, okay, if only you would listen to me, natati kesef hasadeh kach mimeni. Oh, sorry, that's why I read it wrong. Natati kesef hasadeh kach mimeni ve'egberat meti shama. That's why I put the comma in the wrong place. He says, I gave money for the field, take it from me. And then let me bury my Sarah there. So basically, you have this idea of kach mimeni. Kicha is the kinyan. The kicha ikre kinyan. How do we know the kicha is a kinyan? Dichtiv, because later it says, hasadeh asher kana Abraham. It mentions in the context of Maran Machpelah, it's the field that Abraham acquired. There you see, he used the language of take from me. And then later he says, the pasuk says that Abraham acquired. So there you see a connection between kach and kinyan and an acquiring. And by us you see kicha, it must be there's a kinyan going on here. And that's why I use the language of kinyan, because of the kinyan with money. Okay, from here you learn money. Sorry, I forgot to mention one thing there. Ephron acquired it with money. Right, I'm sorry. Abraham acquired it from Ephron with money. And therefore, money, when they use kicha here, it can be done with money. And why do we point that all out? Because we wanted to show, since we're talking about money, that's why our Mishnah used the language of kinyan. Now we turn to Amud Bet, the second side of the page. And now the Gemara offers the second answer. Inami sadot bakesef yiknu. This is another verse. This verse comes up in the famous, and we're going to see this a few times, story of Yirmiyahu. One of Yirmiyahu's prophecies is, Yirmiyahu is told by God to go to Hanamael, his cousin, purchase his land. And this was just before the destruction. Who on earth would purchase land, right? It's a terrible real estate decision. Your land's about to be destroyed. Why would you purchase land? Yirmiyahu purchases land, and they have all these words describing the ceremony and how it went about. It says, Sadot b'kesef yiknu, and v'chatov b'sefer v'chatom. They're going to acquire, and he basically is saying that people are going, what he wants to say is, we will come back to this land, and I'm buying to show you that people will purchase land here, and we will be back in this land. So yes, the destruction is coming, but we will come back. And then they learn all sorts of things. This is the V'chatov b'sefer v'chatom. We actually saw that in the context of Gitin, the writing, signing, and anyway, I'm not going to get all back into that. In any case, from that, you can see that kesef goes with kinyan. Okay? So now they say, Tane ha'isha niknet, v'nitnehatam ha'ish konet. Now here, it said, ha'isha niknet. So we wanted kinyan in our pasuk. Why? Because we wanted to say that ha'isha niknet. And then in the next chapter, it says ha'ish mekadesh. So why didn't it also say there ha'ish koneh? So first we said, why don't we use Kiddushin here? We wanted kinyan. Why didn't we use kinyan there? To which they answer, me'ikara tane lishne de'oraita, ulevasof tane lishne de'rabanan. In the first chapter, we want to use the Torah language, which is lakachat, which is a kinyan. In the second chapter, we want to use the rabbinic language, which turned it into a word of Kiddushin. By the way, you see the rabbis changed. They didn't want it to look like this is acquiring. This isn't a typical acquiring of something because it's a woman and it's a relationship. And they wanted to use Kiddushin, which is more comes from the word sanctity. The relationship is sanctified, right? It's something the way we value marriage as something sanctified. So they use the rabbinic language, to which the Gemara says, "Umay lishana d'Rabbanan." Now, so I use Kiddushin in a particular way, but now they're going to say it actually a little bit differently than I said, which is, what is Kiddushin? My lishon de Rabbanan de asra akule alma kehekdesh. They explain it that a woman is forbidden now, as I told you before, Kiddushin forbids her to all of the world like hekdeshes. When you sanctify something, then it becomes forbidden. Likewise, the woman is sanctified to her husband, she becomes forbidden to everybody else, which is a little bit of a, I would say almost a negative way of saying it, but it actually comes to be saying because of their sanctified relationship between the two. So it works in both ways. So that's why we started off with kinyan, because of the kesef, and then we moved into the rabbinic and the language of Kiddushin. Again, this is all a linguistic argument. It's not your typical Gemara argument, to which the Gemara says, "V'ninehacha ha'ish koneh." So now they say, but why didn't they just say ha'ish koneh? To which they say, Mishum dekabay lemitne seifa v'koneh et atzma. Now they go back to our Mishnah and they say, okay, we compared niknate here and mekadesh there, but there it says the ish mekadesh. So why didn't it say ha'ish koneh instead of saying ha'isha niknate? To which they have a cute answer, or I don't know, cute, but they have an answer here. Mishum dekabay lemitne seifa, because of the next line, v'koneh et atzma. Bedida, because they wanted to say in the end, and she acquires herself. To which they say, okay, well, Tananami, right? Because they wanted Konet Atzma Bedida, Tananami Reisha Bedida, because the subject of the second part, she acquires herself back. The subject was the woman. Therefore, the first part was also the subject was the woman. Haisha Nikne, to which they say, Benine Haish Kone Umakne. Why don't you just say Haish Kone and Makne? The husband acquires the wife in 3 days and returns her back, gives her back to herself in 2 ways. So you could have had the man as the subject, to which they answered not exactly. This is the part I thought was kind of cute. Mishum de'ika mitat haba'a delav iu kamakne min shmayu demakne. The woman gets acquired back in 2 ways. How so? And why is it the woman gets acquired back? Because either he divorces her, that would be the husband's doing, or he dies. That's not his doing. He's not responsible for his own death usually. So therefore it says she gets acquired back and not he gives her back. So we explained why our Mishnah uses kinyan and not Mekadesh, like the next one, and we explain why the subject of our Mishnah is the woman and not the man, whereas the next chapter, it's the man. Now they give another reason, V'bayit Ema, why it starts here with the woman, Itana Kone, if it said Ish Kone, you would have thought, and here's a big issue that it's good to mention already on page 1, which is, or page bet, right? It starts always at the second page, but it's our first daf, which is, if you said Kone, Ha'ish Kone, you would have thought that the woman isn't part of things. You could do it against her will, just like in get. By get, the woman can be divorced against her will. Right? We've learned already many times that Rabbanit Michelle Farber changed that in the 11th century, but in the time of the Gemara, could be done against her will. Therefore, Kiddushin is totally different. Kiddushin cannot be done without the woman's consent. You can't create an interpersonal relationship without the woman agreeing to it. And even the contractual relationship, because it's going to lead to the interpersonal relationship, cannot be done unless she agrees. Later, we'll see that could be the father could agree on her behalf. But there has to be agreement from her side. And that's why the woman is the subject here, because they want you to know. It's very, I would say, almost modern thinking kind of thing. We want to start with the woman because we want you to know that she's an active role. She plays an active role here. She has to agree to the whole thing, as opposed to the previous Masechet where it wasn't the case. Now they start on a whole slew of another question. So we dealt with Ha'isha and Niknet. Okay, really first Niknet and then Ha'isha. Now we're going to deal with B'shalosh, Drachim. Why Shalosh? So now the Gemara says, Umay area de Tane Shalosh, Litne Shloshan. Here comes a grammar discussion. Why Shalosh, which is the feminine form? Why don't you say Shlosha, which is the masculine form? Mishum de Kabay Mitne Derech, the Derech Lashon Nekevahu. Because it said B'shalosh Drachim, and Derech is a feminine word. Dichtiv, V'hodata Lehem et Derech Yochuba. Says here, and I will teach you the way in which you should go ba in it. Now, ba is feminine, not bo, but ba. There you see, derech is feminine. And that's a pasuk in Sefer Shemot. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? But wait, in another Mishnah, it says in 7 ways they check this up to see if it's really zav or not. This is a man who has what's called gonorrhea, and he has a discharge from his private part. And we don't know whether it's zav or not. We have to check all the circumstances, and we have to check 7 things to see if it's really considered a zav or not. I'm not going to get into all the details of that right now, but it says shiv'ah. Shiv'ah is masculine, not feminine. Nitne sheva, it should say sheva, not shiv'ah, if it goes with drachim, and drachim is feminine. To which they answer, mishum de kabayim leb'nei derech. Well, there it used the word derech, which is exactly what's said by us. It's a little confusing, but derech is sometimes also in masculine form. Now we're going to see that derech can go masculine and can go feminine. That's going to be very confusing. This is a book from pasuk from Sefer Dvarim, and it says b'derech echad. That means it's masculine. Echad is masculine. It would be echad if it was feminine. And Shiv'ah Drachim is also masculine. So here you see Derech could be Zachar. So Ihach, he said, how they say, now you've gotten us totally confused. Kashu Kraya Hadade, the Psukim contradict each other. Kashu Nami Manitin Hadade in the Mishnah. The Mishnahs contradict each other. We have 2 Psukim, one says Derech is feminine and one says it's masculine. We have 2 Mishnayot, one says it's feminine, one says it's masculine. To which they answer, Lo Kashu. Had b'Torah Kai, b'Torah Ikre Lashon Nikeva, Dichtiv Torah Hashem Tmima V'Shiva Nefesh. The first pasuk we quoted was, I'm going to show you the way of the Torah. So the subject is derech haTorah, really. And Torah is feminine. As we say, Torah Hashem is timima, not tamim, but timima. That's feminine. And it's mishivat nefesh, not mishiv nefesh. So therefore, since the subject there was the Torah, it used it in the feminine form. But the second pasuk, when they will run away from you, it's talking about war. What do we know about war? Men generally are the warriors and not the women. This might have changed somewhat nowadays, although still the majority of warriors are men, but there are more women in the army. But certainly in those days, no women were fighting in the army. And therefore they say, it's not the way of women to fight in war. Therefore, derech there, it all depends on the context. Derech there is going to be masculine. By the way, if you look this up in Lashon LaAkademia HaIvrit, which is the source for the best place for understanding whether something is zachar and nekeva. I think that's where I found it. It says there, or at least where I searched it, I can't remember if in the end I found it there or somewhere else. It says that derech is nekeva, actually. Okay, that I knew. We really use it in the feminine form in the modern Hebrew language, but it says b'safrut, it's sometimes zachar, and safrut are relating to the Torah basically, and this sugya. So it's good. So here's our source for it. So now they say, and therefore, so therefore, in the case of the war pasuk in Dvarim, it uses it in the masculine. So that resolved the pasukim. But manitin hadade lo kasha and manitin hadade lo kasha. And now we're going to explain the Mishnah. Why our Mishnah said in feminine and the Mishnah in Zav used the masculine. Hachadil gabi isha kai katani la b'lashon nekeva. Hatam dil gabi ish kai did kosher ish lebadek ve'en kasha lisha lebadek ka'isha nami ba'onis mitama. Tani lashon zachar. Okay, I read a long thing here, but basically what they're saying is the subject there was the zav, masculine. That's why it's a masculine. The subject by us was a female, the woman, and therefore it's feminine. Now, why? What about a zava? Isn't a zava also need to be checked? And the answer is no. And that's what they're explaining here. Only a man needs to be checked. There's certain, if a man has a discharge, zava is a woman who has a discharge. They're very different discharges. The woman, it's blood. The man, it's a clear discharge. It's totally different thing, even though it has the same name, basically. But the rules are also different. If he sees zav because of a sickness or something else external that caused it, then it's not zav. But for the woman, it doesn't matter why she's having this bleeding. This is bleeding beyond her menstrual bleeding or when it's not the time of her menstruation. And there, it doesn't matter what it is. It just matters that it has the criteria that it be called a zav. But you don't need these bidikot that the zav needs because it's not relevant to her. One of the main things is ba'onis. In other words, if it happened against something happened to him that caused it, then he won't become impure. But a woman will become impure. Okay, and that's why they use different languages. So we resolve the contradiction in the psukim. We resolve the contradiction in the Mishnayot. Now the Gemara says, "My time tane shalosh mishum." So now they say, "Sorry, my time tane shalosh mishum drachim." Now they're going to ask a different question. So we just said 3 because of derech. Nitne dvarim v'nitne shlosha mishum tekabay l'mitne bi'ah. Period. So why didn't we say instead of drachim, ways? Why didn't we say dvarim? There's 3 things in which a woman can be acquired. Okay, 3 matters. So you can use 3 matters. You can use money. You can use shtar. You can use intercourse. So why didn't we use the word dvarim? And then dvarim would be clearly a masculine word, and then it would be shlosha. To which they answer, mishum dekabay l'mitne bi'ah. Ubi'ah ikre derech. Well, because they wanted to get to the word bi'ah, and bi'ah, which is intercourse, is also synonymous with the word derech. Derech is used to talk about intercourse. And that's why they wanted to use derech here to kind of connect those 2 words. And that's why this sugya, as you can see, is all about wording, and it's very off the regular track of a Gemara sugya. Dichtiv, v'derech gever ba'alma, kain derech isha min ha'ef. There's a pasuk that says this is the way, right? The way men are with women, that's the way also a woman who's an adulteress. These are like common ways that things go, okay? The continuation of that pasuk is, just find it inside here. Sorry, I lost my place. Derech, it's hey here. Derech hanesher b'shamayim, derech nachash aleitzur. These are the nature of the way things go. Okay, derech oniyah b'lev yam. This is the way a boat goes in the sea. Derech gever ba'alma, the way a man is with a young maiden. Kain derech isha min ha'efet. This is the way of a woman who's an adulterer. Achla u'machatapia. She eats, meaning she engages in sexual relations and then cleans her mouth. Amra lo pa'alti aven. And then she says, oh, I didn't do anything. Okay. What they're saying is this is the way human nature works. Okay. The nature of a woman who's an adulterer. So what do you see here? Derech is clearly referring to a euphemism for intercourse. So now they say, because derech goes with bi'ah, that's why they use derech and not dava. To which the Gemara says, okay, well, hatinach bi'ah, that makes sense because of the bi'ah, but kesef ishtar me'ikal memra, but there's also kesef and shtar. You could have said daval relating to those. Well, mishum bi'ah, because of bi'ah, that's why, because bi'ah appeared of one of those 3. To which the Gemara says, v'tani tarte atuchada, what you're going to change the language because of one, when there's another 2 others. So they say, yeah, hanach nami tzorich bi'aninu. And here I think you're getting at something much more fundamental, which goes back to what we said before about the contractual and the interpersonal. Even when you get betrothed through money or shtar, even though it's very contractual and very formal, but it's all leading to bi'ah, which again is the ultimate, right? The interpersonal relationship, the intimacy between the couple. So bi'ah is really the most important of all of them, even though, talk about this later, but the rabbis discouraged Kiddushin through bi'ah. They said this is like a parutz way of doing things. It's like it's very barbaric. It's not the way we do things. We don't betroth the woman through that. It comes after the betrothal. And they really didn't want people to do this, but basically what they're saying is since the bi'ah is intertwined with the Kiddushin, because the Kiddushin eventually leads to bi'ah for the marriage, that's why the word derech was chosen. Second answer, Hamani Rabbi Shimon. Tanya Rabbi Shimon. Maybe this all goes according to Rabbi Shimon. Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer, mipnei ma amra Torah ki yikach ish isha, v'lo katav ki tilakach isha leish. Why does it say when a man takes a woman and not when a woman is taken to a man? Okay, why is the focus on the man here? Mishum shedarko shel ish. There's an interesting line, right? Lechazer al isha ve'ein darka shel isha lechazer al ish. The general way things go is that the man initiates the relationship. He's the one who seeks out the women, and it's not the way of the women to seek out a man. What does this have to do with anything? Because this is all the way of the world. Again, we go back to the derech. The derech, the way of the pasuk, now they're not using that same pasuk anymore, but this is the way things go, right? Human nature. Human nature is like this. Ki kachi shisha is a typical human nature, that the man goes out and seeks the woman. Why is this? Mashallah Adam shavda bo avidah. This all goes back to Adam Arishon, so the first man that was created. This is like someone who loses something. Remember, his rib was taken from that woman, Chava was created. So this is like someone who lost an Avedah, mi chozer al mi, who goes searching for the lost item. Does the lost item search for its owner, or does the owner search for the lost item? Obviously, Baal Avedah mechazer al avedato. He goes and looks for his lost item. Okay, so there we have two answers why derech was used, either because of bi'ah, which is the central part of the marriage relationship, or because of it's teaching you about the way of the world. This is the way of the world, that a man betroths a woman and seeks a woman. The haditnan, but wait a minute, what about? So that's why derech is used in our Mishnah. Now we have to go back to the Zav Mishnah. In 7 ways they check the Zav. Litnei dvarim. Why didn't it say in 7 matters? Hatam hakamashmalan dedarcha demichle yeterala tuili dezi. Darcha demishti yeterala tuili dezi. Now they wanted to tell people that there's ways of doing things that cause Zav, which is either eating too much or drinking too much could cause you to become a Zav. And therefore they use the word derech because they want to show you, again, it's not exactly the simple reading because that's not what it's saying, but it alludes to something else. Okay, so now we answer both those questions. Why derech here? Why derech in the Zav? The haditnan, what about another case? And we're going to keep going into tomorrow's daf with this as well. We'll stop soon. Etrog shaveh le'ilam b'shalosh drachim v'litnei dvarim. An etrog is like a tree in 3 ways. Why didn't it say dvarim in 3 matters? Mishum debi'ina matnei seifa uli yerech b'derech achat. Because of the second part, which said, and it's similar to a vegetable in 1 way. So they say that didn't help us. It could also say it's similar to a vegetable in 1 matter. So we're going to stop here in the etrog. We're going to do it tomorrow. In what ways is it similar to a tree? In what ways to vegetables? We'll get to all that in tomorrow's daf. Again, let's do a quick review. We saw the woman is acquired in 3 ways and acquires herself back in 2. The Yavama in 1 way versus 2 ways. Then we had, and which ways we learned, then we started a whole question. Why does it say Niknet and not Mekadesh? Why does it say there Ha'ish, and by the second chapter Ish, and by us Isha? Why does it say Shalosh Drachim instead of Dvarim? Why does it say Shalosh instead of Shlosha? And then why does it say Drachim instead of Dvarim? And each time we brought other sources to try to see and make sense out of all this. With this, we'll finish our daf for today. Wishing everybody a great day and hope you enjoy this new Masechet.